Good evening, everybody. I'm just going to give 1 minute as we're a virtual event, of course, and allow people to be able to dial in. And then I will get us going. So just hang on for 1 more minute and then we will kick off. All right, well, we are a couple minutes after. We'll give a little bit more time for people to join, but welcome to everyone who is here. Welcome to anyone new to the Center for Women and Democracy, and of course, welcome to all of our members who've joined us tonight. I am thrilled that we are able to host this conversation and this event on breaking barriers, the rise of Black women's leadership in Washington State. And we have some phenomenal speakers and moderator this evening who are going to share their insights, share the history of Black women leaders, particularly in Washington State, and then talk about the current status of Black women leaders as well. Before we do that, I'd like to do a short introduction. So my name is Frances Donegan Ryan. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the president of the board for the Center for Women and Democracy. If you're new to CWD, as we fondly call it, we are a member-based supported organization that empowers women to lead where they land. Our diverse community of powerful women both fosters leadership development, deep connections, and opportunities for our members. And we do this through the discussion, education, advocacy, and amplifying all women's voices to create a more equitable world. And so tonight's event is one of the ways in which we do that by offering our members the opportunity to learn, to connect, and to ask questions of these powerful leaders so that we can learn from them. Before we begin, I'd also like to do a land acknowledgement. Of course, we are here and benefiting from the native land that we live on. I am based here in Seattle and King County, and if you are also in Seattle, you are more than likely on lands either by the Duwamish tribe or the Salish coastal tribes. So just want to acknowledge that and say a thank you to them as well. Also, we would like you to save the date for our upcoming events. We will have an event as we do each month. March and April are still being finalized, so you will get emails, and we will of course be posting on social media about the theme and the speakers for those events. For those of you who are expecting a March 8th event in partnership with Be Bold, as that is a hybrid event, both in person and virtual, it has been postponed to May 11th, so that it will be a safer time for all of us to gather in person. That's a partner event we're doing with the Be Bold organization to celebrate International Women's Day. And then we will also be holding our own event on May 19th at the Seattle Opera House, celebrating women in the arts. And that will be an in-person event that will also be streamed live. And so we very much look forward to seeing you in person in May and hosting you for a virtual event in March and April. Next, I'll say that we have some, like I mentioned, phenomenal guests, and I want to make sure that everyone knows how to ask a question. So if you look at your Zoom menu, there's a Q&A function. Feel free to type your questions in there, and then we will directly answer them once our panelists and guest speakers have finished their talks. You can also continue the conversation in the chat function. We'd love to hear your thoughts as the guests are speaking. And talking about our guests, here's who we have tonight with the Honorable Marilyn Strickland, who's the U.S. Congresswoman from Washington 10. We have Twena Nobles, who is a Washington State Senator. Deborah Entenmann, who's a Washington State Representative from the Legislative District 47. Lakeisha Phillips, who's on the Washington School Board in Federal Way. And Aisha Du, who's the Program and Political Director at Higher Heights for America. And you will learn more about that organization as they come on. And tonight, our moderator is former Washington State Representative Christine Reeves, who is also a Center for Women and Democracy Board member. So I'd like to introduce, I have the very great honor of introducing Congresswoman Strickland. She's the Congresswoman for the 10th Congressional District, which covers Pierce County, Thurston County, and parts of Mason County. She was born in South Korea and is the first African-American to represent Washington State at the federal level, and one of the first Korean-American women elected to Congress. And she is passionate about families, supporting families, education. She's worked tirelessly for her district in
Railway, Climate Rail Alliance, and Rail Can't Wait. Thank you.
Sorry, I think we have someone off mute. If you could just check that you're on mute, that would be wonderful. She has great plans for the environment, for business and housing, and for our infrastructure in our region and state. I don't want to take up much more time. Please read her full bio on our website or on her own site, and she's going to tell us more about herself, about what she's passionate about, and about what being a leader in Washington State means for her. So without further ado, Congresswoman, I'd like to hand it over to you, and thank you again for spending your precious time with us this evening.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that generous introduction, and thank you to the Center for Women and Democracy for inviting me to be part of this event. And the title of tonight's event is really interesting to me. It's The Rise of Black Women's Leadership in Washington, and it's about breaking barriers. And whether I've done so intentionally or not, that's exactly what I've done most of my career. As mentioned earlier in the introduction, you know, I am Black and Korean. My father served in the military in a segregated army when he first joined, met my mother in Seoul when he was stationed there. They got married, I was born, and our family moved here to the United States. And, you know, I was not one of those young people in high school or college who always knew I was going to run for office. I actually thought I was going to be a businesswoman, and I spent most of my early career in the private sector, in the business world. I was actually recruited to run for local government and city council. And I tell people that city council and city government is really the heart and soul for me of government, doing things on a daily basis, making decisions in a more expeditious manner to affect people's lives. After serving on city council for 2 years, I ran for mayor and served 2 terms there. And I remember the local newspaper writing about my candidacy for mayor, and they called it audacious. It was audacious that I had the nerve to decide to run for mayor. Now, I ended up winning that race. It was very, very close. We didn't know for 4 days what the outcome was. And then I was lucky enough to actually run unopposed for my 2nd term. And I say this because I think about the Black experience in this country as a Black woman, especially. You know, it often feels as though we are policed. And I'm not talking about law enforcement, how we wear our hair, the shape of our bodies, the tone of our voices, and even the double standard that we typically have to endure when we are held up against other people. And I think sometimes this really falls to people having a very prescriptive idea of what it means to be Black in this country. And I think about the fact that we are not a monolith. We represent a whole spectrum of life experiences and backgrounds. You know, I'm a military kid. My mother's an immigrant. I was born in Seoul, so that is my worldview. I went to University of Washington. I attended Clark Atlanta University, which is a historically Black college and university, have a master's degree in business, and I pursued the private sector early in my career. That's my life experience. And I think sometimes a challenge that we have, especially when it comes to getting roles in elected office or even just our careers, is that people have a very prescriptive idea of what our experience is supposed to be. And when it doesn't meet their expectations, there's a bit of cognitive dissonance that they have. But with that said, I'm so proud that I'm from Washington State. And to be honest with you, Washington State's Black population is maybe around 4.5%. So this is not like some of the states around the country where there are large Black populations. No coincidence, most of us probably live on the west side of Washington State, up and down the I-5 corridor. And the further south you go, the more Black and brown the communities get. And I'm so incredibly proud that, I was the first Black female mayor of my hometown, Tacoma. But I'm even more proud that my successor, Victoria Woodards, is also a Black woman. So how many times outside of majority or large Black populated cities would you ever hear of 2 consecutive mayors being elected to serve 2 terms who are Black and who are female? That's pretty remarkable. And you're going to meet some of the other remarkable people who are elected officials in Washington State. With that said, I understand that when we have the opportunity to break barriers and to be the first, we are always very cognizant of the fact that we never want to be the last. And I think that's important because as we look at the opportunity we have to lead, we always have to be cognizant of the fact that there were people who fought battles before us that we cannot even imagine having to fight. So when I was given the opportunity, or the opportunity presented itself for me to be a local elected official, to be the CEO of the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, to be in Congress, I understood that there was a legacy that I had to follow. There in many ways was a responsibility, a duty I had to lead, because too many people came before me so that doors could open that would even make me viable in those positions. And we're talking about Black women's political leadership, but I want to talk about just some of the leaders in Washington State in general. The superintendent of public schools in Tacoma is a Black woman who just retired. The head of the United Way of Pierce County is a Black woman. And so when you think about where we show up, we are actually in many places up and down the I-5 corridor and across the state. I don't want to disrespect anyone. And just really understanding that it says a lot that we are in places that aren't necessarily majority minority spaces, and people still trust us to do the work. And I think that just comes down to the fact that, when you talk about Black female leadership, it is never because we're not qualified. In many cases, we are more than qualified. Think about the debate raging right now about President Biden's promise to appoint a Black woman to the US Supreme Court. Now, he made that promise on the campaign trail. So as the conversation takes place today, what are some of the initial responses that some people have? Well, we should find the most qualified candidate first. Well, there is a deep and wide pool of qualified Black women who are capable of being on the US Supreme Court. And so every time I hear that argument, I always lead with, well, of course we're qualified. That's a given, because we have to be to compete. And I think about some of the other opportunities that we have as a nation to make sure that Black women's leadership is recognized, is heard, and is celebrated. And I say this because I know that our life experiences are so broad and so varied that when we're at the table, our voices are so incredibly important. We will fight hard for economic security for our families, whether that's through entrepreneurship, whether it's addressing Black maternal health, whether it's addressing access to historically Black colleges and universities, whether it's looking at environmental justice, access to transportation, affordable healthcare, all the things that we know play into this whole idea of a nation that is safe, that is just, and that is secure. That is something that every person in this country deserves to have. And it's something that we know we can bring to the table as we talk about what's important in the terms of policymaking and how we want to move things forward. So, I think about, again, being a first, right? The first person who's a woman from Clark Atlanta University who now serves in the US House of Representatives. But I also think there's something special about showing up where people don't expect to see you. And I think about the fact that, the way that I have navigated my career, not always on a linear path for sure, but when I was at City Hall, I got involved in municipal finance. I got involved in government performance, places where you didn't expect to see me. When I was approached by the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce to be their CEO, which was history making, another first, that's a place where people didn't expect to see a Black woman. But for me, this has always been about economic empowerment, economic opportunity, and really leveraging those things to make sure that things are better for our community at every single turn. showing up where people least expect to see you. I'm a member of the House Armed Services Committee. I am the only Black woman right now in Congress who serves in that committee. And here's why this is important. When you look at the military population, and Joint Base Lewis McChord is right in my district, 40% of the people who serve who are enlisted are people of color. 20% are African American, and African American women are very, very present when it comes to US military. So as a member of this committee, I am doing everything in my power to ensure that we have housing on post, that people are able to access childcare, that the basic housing allowance goes up, but everything that we can do to make sure that some of these majority minority places are places where our people can thrive and be taken care of. I'm one of a handful of African American women who serve on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Again, not exactly a place where people typically expect to see us, but we know that if we want to have an equitable economy and access to housing and opportunity, we have to have a high quality public transportation system and transportation that's safe, that's equitable and accessible for all. So those are just a few of the ways that I believe that Black women's leadership in politics can make such a difference. And here's the other responsibility we have too. Organizations like Higher Heights, who I've known since my time as mayor, do a phenomenal job of supporting, nurturing, and helping Black women be successful, whether it's at the school board level, city council, mayor's office, running for state legislature, and yes, even the halls of Congress and governor's mansions. It's incredibly important for us to understand that the Black experience is the American experience. I often tell people that as we look at Black History Month, sometimes people think about it as the shortest month of the year. And this is like that 28 days where we celebrate and we move on. And we all know this, Black history is American history. And when we Black women are at the table, we make better decisions. And I believe it goes beyond what I call the very stereotypical female traits of, oh, we're better listeners and we're better collaborators. Absolutely, but we're also decisive. And we understand that elections matter because for so many of us in the Black community, especially Black women, we know that our lives are at stake. It is no coincidence that Black women are the most loyal voters of the Democratic Party. It's no coincidence that when Black women vote, 95% of the time, we will vote for Democrats. And that's because those line up with our values, the things that they care about, we care about. And now as we look at leadership in this country, I tell folks that we're building a bench. You know, I'm so proud of the number of Black women who are in political leadership in the South Puget Sound, and you're going to meet some of them, and there are so many of them. I'm also proud that we are building up a pipeline of talent to ensure that when someone moves on, we have a qualified Black female candidate who can run and is a viable person. So this is an effort that is ongoing. It doesn't come and go during an election year. Kamala Harris is our vice president, and that brings me so much joy to even say it. But think about the level of scrutiny that the vice president now gets because a Black woman is in that job. And this is not a complaint because, you know, we talk about Black women being strong and resilient, but sometimes that makes me sad because resiliency often means that there was some kind of trauma. So as I think about the women I serve with, who I consider my friends and my colleagues, as I think about the women who I serve with geographically, who are in this region, I am so incredibly proud to be part of this sisterhood that recognizes that we are not a monolith, but we have one thing in common. We want to improve the lives and livelihoods and safety of Black people. We want to make sure that when we talk about safety, yes, it's about policing and the justice system, but it's also about access to clean water, where we live, a good education, a roof over our heads, economic security. Those things have a direct impact on your safety and well-being. So thank you again for letting me be here today. As we break barriers, I will come back to when I said earlier, you are always honored and privileged to be the first, but you never want to be the last. And it is my goal to make sure that every time we have an open seat in any office, that we have a viable Black candidate and hopefully a viable Black female candidate. So let's get this done. Thank you so much for letting me be here today. And it is my honor and privilege to represent the 10th Congressional District of Washington State.
Thank you, Congresswoman Strickland, excuse me. Got caught up in your words and kind of lost track of where I was. That was a great presentation there. we don't have any questions in the Q&A yet. So I will take advantage of my moderator privilege
Okay.
to ask a question that I have.
Sure.
And you actually touched upon it in your work, in your presentation. You talked about how people trust Black women to show up and trust you to do the work. And my question has always, my own research focuses on trust and democracy and how do you build that trust. So why do you think Black women have that level of trust, even by white women, white people, other people within your communities? What provides you with that level of trust? I don't have a better way of saying that.
Yeah, I mean, why do people trust us to show up and do the work? And there is an answer I say with pride, and there's an answer I say with sadness, right? Because, you know, we are the backbone of this country. We help build this country. We are the most reliable voters. And so we know that we have not had the luxury of not showing up to do the work, because our lives have been in danger. Our livelihoods have been in danger. Our families depend on us so much. You know, as I think about the caregiving crisis that we have in America right now, and this is really the caregiving infrastructure of those who care for our youngest, those who care for disabled family members, and those who care for our eldest, that system is broken. And the vast majority of people who work in that system are women of color, immigrants, and a lot of African-American women. And here's the deal. We show up because we don't have the luxury of not showing up. When it comes to every election, we can't sit in a corner crossing our arms and being petulant, because if we don't vote, our lives are in danger. And I hate coming back to this, but I do all the time. But, you know, in 2016, we did our part. We did not let down the sisterhood. And so we can be trusted. So my question is, when do we get to trust others to do their jobs? That's the question I pose back.
I fully agree with that question. And we as white women, and certainly others within our communities, certainly have an obligation to step up and to help you so you don't have to carry the load. And I guess that picks up on Kathy's question here. Sorry, I just lost it here.
That's okay.
How do we encourage those who trusted Black women to lead, support us after we are elected? That's from Kathy McKern.
No, that's a really good question. I think some of it comes back to this perception that people often have of what it means to be Black, right? So, you know, my life experience is that of a military kid. We had a roof over our head, food on the table. My family, my mom and dad owned their house, and it was paid off by the time I was out of high school. And so we were relatively stable, you know, lower middle class, not very well to do, but still pretty stable. And I think for some people, they have this notion that if you're Black, you always have to be in this deep, horrible struggle. Every Black person I know who has done well for themselves are living their parents' dream. That is exactly what every parent hopes for their child, that they can do better. And I've heard, you know, I've even heard some folks I know talk about how, again, the perception that people have. And let me give a very specific example. You know, I was, when I was running for Congress, I was in some meeting with one of the legislative districts, and someone said to me in an attempted gotcha question, like, well, do you now regret endorsing candidate X in the presidential election? And I remember I just calmly said, I think you're mistaking me for another Black female mayor in Tacoma. And I think sometimes, you know, people have an idea that our politics can only be in one direction. And here's the deal, you know, when I think about the African-American experience, it's like, you know, we represent the entire political spectrum. As a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, some of our members are progressives, some of our members are part of the New Dems, which I belong to, and some people are blue dogs. I mean, it just depends on what your life experience is and what, you know, what it is you see. But there are many ways to fight the battles. And so when I think about how people can support us by understanding where we come from and our life experience. Support us by recognizing that we're not a monolith, and support us by recognizing that even if you don't agree with our politics 100% of the time, Black women still vote Democrat 95% of the time. So again, who's loyal to the party and who's not? That's the question.
How much more time do you have?
I can take a couple more questions if there are any.
Anonymous audience member asks, if Black folks are 5% of Washington state population, they ask, is a goal of 5% reasonable to hope for a successful diversity goal? I would almost want to add, do we want to aim higher with that? But I'll leave you to answer that question instead.
Yeah, I mean, in a state that's only 5% Black, and again, keep in mind that the I-5 corridor, which tends to have more urban and suburban neighborhoods and voters, has a higher concentration of African Americans and people of color. So with that said, I think that, we've already proven that we can win when we run good, strong campaigns. That's a fact. And so I think the question becomes, when we talk about having diversity goals, I want to make sure that we don't believe that there's a ceiling. I think sometimes we think, okay, we've got our one Black member, so we've done our duty. It's like, no, there's no ceiling when it comes to Black female representation. There's no ceiling when it comes to people of color representing on boards, commissions, elected office. And so I think, I think in Washington state, we do a good job of focusing on the qualifications of candidates. But also I will tell you, to a person, everyone I know who served in elected office who's African American touts that as an asset.
Mary Anderson asks, what tools can you offer when you are being mistreated because of the color of your skin? For example, microaggressions.
Yeah, I think, one of those things for me is like, when you think about the demands and the volume of work that you have to do, and this is managing your life, your family, and then serving as an elected official, I tell folks that, it depends on the aggression, right? It's like, I can't stop and press pause every time someone commits a microaggression to me because I'd be consumed with it all the time. And so I focus on macroaggressions. I make sure that if I think that there is some kind of a slight taking place or something that's offensive or rude, I stop and ask myself, is this going to get in the way of me doing my job well? And then also too, depending on the circumstance, I call people out. But I also hope that these are teaching moments, because whether intentional or not, people need to be fully aware when they are doing something that is a microaggression. But I tell folks, like, I came up in a time in the United States and in the private sector and even in public office where being the only person in the room was a very common situation, and today it's still very common. And so I think it depends on your situation and how you choose to address it.
And one final question that I think it touches back to your ceiling statement from Judge Mamillo. Would the question rather be, how are the systems in Washington state supporting Black people? The ceiling statement is where the discussion starts.
No, that's a really good question. When you think about politics and political opportunity here, with the exception of, local politics at City Hall and maybe school boards, things run through the party. And so I think the question becomes, are the parties truly committed to being equitable and inclusive? And that includes the legislative districts, it includes the state party, and obviously the national party. And I will tell you that, even though sometimes people talk a good game about diversity, equity, and inclusion, their actions indicate the complete opposite. And so as we talk about what it means to have political power and to have a seat at the table, I remind folks of a few things. People sometimes don't quite know what to do when you show up, but always be your authentic self. And again, there's no ceiling about how far we can go, but I also think it's important, when people are not doing right by us, that we were able to call them out for it, and not in a disrespectful way, but to say, you say you're about DEI, but you're very, very prescriptive in what that means. And again, respect the fact that we represent so many different backgrounds and life experiences. But again, our common theme is we want what's best for our community, and we're going to fight like tooth and nail to get it.
Well, thank you so much. I love listening to you. I was busy taking notes, so thank you very much for your thoughtful responses to our questions, for taking up your very valuable time and joining us tonight. Christine, if you can come on to the screen for just a moment, that would be great. I'll pass it to Christine for a few moments.
Yeah, well, Congresswoman, we know that you have another event to get to tonight, and I know you're incredibly busy. So thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your wisdom and your lived experience with us. I think so often that's the relationship that we need to do more work to build is to understand and seek understanding of folks that we maybe haven't had the chance to interact with before. So we really are grateful for your leadership and your continued leadership, and look forward to continuing to engage in a strong relationship with you moving forward. So thanks for coming tonight.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. Take care.
Congresswoman Strickland has another event tonight, so she's going to jump off, but I am excited to join you this evening to welcome a panel of amazing leaders here in Washington State on behalf of the Center for Women and Democracy. So I'll ask my panelists to go ahead and come off camera, and I'm going to provide just really brief intros for each of them. And then what we will do is go ahead and engage in hopefully what is more like a coffee style discussion. We'll encourage all of you on the call tonight to feel free to continue to put questions in the chat. You can direct them to specific members of the panel, or you can say this is for everyone. And we will try to monitor the Q&A and make sure that we're getting those incorporated into the discussion. So tonight I'm going to start by welcoming one of our national allies, a woman that you may not be familiar with here in Washington State because she's not actually from Washington, but who is incredibly instrumental in having helped a lot of the women that you will meet tonight break barriers at the local level, the state level, and as Congresswoman Strickland said, at the national level. So it's my pleasure to welcome tonight Aisha Dew, who's the program and political director for an organization called Higher Heights for America, which is focused on helping Black women break barriers all across this country and create some parity in electoral office. She'll talk a little bit more about her organization tonight, but just want to welcome Aisha tonight. I know it's late where you are, so thanks for making time to join us. I also want to welcome to the stage tonight, I know she's going back and forth between Transpo committee meetings. As you know, the Washington State Legislature is still meeting. We're in a short session this year. But it sounds like, looks like, Francis, if you could be so kind as to help me enable video for both State Representative Entman and State Senator Tawana Nobles, that would be fantastic so that they can get themselves on camera. Thank you. But I'll start with State Senator Tawana Nobles, who, as many of you probably have heard her name, maybe have had the privilege of getting to meet her, but is the state senator from the South Puget Sound, Tacoma area. And as we were talking about here at the Center for Women and Democracy, we all know Rosa Franklin. Well, welcome to the next generation of Rosa Franklin. Senator Tawana Nobles is serving as a state senator in Olympia. She is the first, I can't remember how many years it is, Senator, so you may have to remind me, but the first African-American woman elected to the Senate since Senator Franklin left. 10 years? It's been 10 years. That's a big gap, friends. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts, Senator, as we move forward. Next up, I want to welcome a very dear friend of mine and a mentor who has taught me so much about the work ahead. I want to welcome to the team, to the conversation, State Representative Deborah Entman, who represents the 47th Legislative District, which, for those of you not familiar with the Ledge Districts, is kind of the southeast part of Pierce and King County, and has served in the legislature since 2018. And the exciting part of the work that she has a very comprehensive background, but one of the things that's really exciting to learn about Representative Entman is that when she joined the legislature, she helped triple the number of Black women serving in the building, and has done a phenomenal job there ever since. So look forward to learning more about her journey to breaking barriers. And last, I want to welcome, definitely not least, one of my very good friends, School Board Director Lakeisha Phillips. Lakeisha represents the Federal Way School District here in South King County. And what some of you may not know is that the Federal Way School District is the 5th most diverse school district in the country. And School Director Phillips is one of the first women of color to get to serve on the school board. And brings a really great perspective to the work of making sure that all of our kids get equal access to educational opportunity. So as you can see, I think we've got a pretty diverse group of folks that are joining us tonight who are going to share with us their lived experience, their background, their journey, and what it means for them to break barriers. So I'll start, friends, by sharing the first question, which is really just to ask you all, what does it mean to you to be able to break barriers. What do those barriers look like? And how has that manifested in your lives, particularly as Black women? And I'll let any of you jump in who feel prepared to answer that.
I can definitely jump in because I may have to pop off to for committee, but I'm Senator Tawana Nobles, very grateful to be here tonight. And I am in agreement with so many of the things that Congresswoman Strickland shared, including people have an idea oftentimes of what our journey should be as Black women. And I think Congresswoman Strickland said it so clearly, unlike that is a problem and challenge that they have to deal with. But if we're honest, Black women have always broken barriers. And if anything, our stories have simply been untold or denied, but we have always been women of excellence, women who are trusted, women who have held this country up. And so many of the things that we are doing today are in alignment with what our ancestors have always done, but people still seem to be perplexed, seem to buy into the narrative of we need to come in one shape and one form and one style. And we continue to deliver and also disappoint on that narrative. But we continue to show up and break barriers for our community, and so many women and men of different backgrounds and non-gendered people who are looking up to us and continue to be amazed at the ways that we can care for ourselves and yet care for so many, at the ways that we can endure adversity and still show up and smile and exude joy. And so I think we are breaking tremendous barriers and representing what it means to stay lifted and stay joyful and make our ancestors tremendously proud. And I think that is just such a really good feeling and legacy to walk in as a Black woman, and a Black woman who's elected as a leader in this state.
And to continue to follow up with that, thank you for having me here tonight. I agree with Senator Nobles and with Representative Strickland. The barriers that were created because we weren't in mind when people had the thought of what success could look like in this country. We have to think about the foundation. We also have to think about the image of what it was to be a woman. When people were talking about the woman who was staying at home, raising children, we have always worked outside of the home, whether for our own survival, the survival of our family, or just for our own fulfillment. So we weren't thought about as women in the first place. So we have always had to define who we are, and then from there go on to measure our own success. And so when I think about being in politics and government now, and prior to that, being at home raising my children, there was success there, there is success here, and I'm looking forward to a new chapter. I'm remaining in the legislature for now, but I'm also applying to graduate school at 60 years old and hoping to become a lawyer. So, I don't see this as a one and done. I see this as a continuation of the lifelong learning and goal setting and goal attaining that I have had the opportunity from my mother to look forward to. My grandmother lived to be 101. She passed away in 2005, and everybody always asked her how she lived so long. And she said it's because she always had something to do. She always had work to do. So that's how I think about my life. I have work to do. I will continue.
Beautiful. Lakeisha, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you so much again for having me. And I'm just going to build on what Rep. Intamin just shared. I think for me, breaking barriers, there's a level of vulnerability and standing in your purpose. I really appreciate literally everybody on this call at some form or fashion. We've run into each other or seen each other or talked, and every person on here has just said something positive. We've always kind of just fed into each other, like spoke up with each other, gave each other advice. I really love that we're vulnerable with each other, but we always see each other. And that was huge. I remember even just thinking about crawling into this arena. I was like, oh, is this something I want to do? And I went to, I think, a local coffee shop and met Rep Intiman, and I was like, is this something we do? And she's like, yes, this is something we do. And that just changed my trajectory. And that was before I was in office. So I think I really love the vulnerability, but also I think breaking barriers means just really standing in your calling. At times you know that you're called to do this work, or you might feel this energy like I can do this. So there is also something about stepping into that space and really stepping into your calling that can be incredibly challenging. But again, it's always kind of worth it to follow through on that. And that's what it means to break barriers for me.
Well, I guess that leaves me. I think that basically following, as you alluded to, Lakeisha, or as you said, really following your purpose, having passion-driven work. I think that as far as breaking barriers, it definitely matters, right? Because you set the tone so that if you're the first, then you won't be the last, right? And you get to set the tone for those who come behind you. But I think what happens is that for those of us who are following our purpose, we don't think about breaking barriers as much as we think about making an impact and helping people and following our calling.
Leave it to Miss Aisha to put a fine point on it. Very well said. And thank you all for sharing just very minor snippets of the authentic humans that you all are. I'm loving fangirling on all of you right now. And so to that, I will say, obviously, I think to Miss Aisha's point, you know, y'all are history makers. There's no doubt about that. But as Congresswoman Strickland said earlier, we all stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, who fought for us to be here, to even be in this room tonight. Would love to hear from each of you, kind of who do you look to, either in the past or moving forward as kind of your inspiration to continue kind of working at your calling, to break barriers, to manifest our destiny. And I recognize Senator and Representative, you both are still, it sounds like, in session. So if you have to pop off, we totally understand. We'll work around you. But would love for you guys just to share, like, who do you look to for that inspiration to keep fighting the good fight for the future? Lakeisha, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Representative Entman.
Sure.
And then Aisha.
I have a little bit of a mixed one on that one. I think my inspiration comes from children, the youth, like just seeing some of the stuff they're creating, the feelings that they have, the perceptions that they have. I recently walked one of our local high schools, and it was so cool. It is Black History Month. I got to see some of the things they were creating, and like they were having a Black Excellence Day. They had on these clothing and garbs and colors and light. And I was just like, you guys are doing it. So I think seeing our children and just knowing that cultural connection to them, they're looking, they're watching, but they're also giving us information. Like if you ask them, they'll tell you. So I absolutely love that. And then I would just say all the elders I have around me, like, I think as I get older, I start to value all the information, all the wisdom. Like, you know, when you're young, you don't necessarily pay attention. You're like, man, you know, Grams is over here. But as I get older, I'm like, wow, like, okay, these are important. And yeah, so I think it's just looking to my elders, looking to the culture. I mean, I have quilts in my house, and you just don't think about them when your grandmother gives them to you. And as you get there, you're like, oh, there's stories here, there's information here. So it's definitely like inspiration to just kind of keep moving forward. And yeah, it just keeps me going.
And my inspiration comes from that generation that is at the midpoint in their lives. I have a lot of women who are gently moving into their 40s and 50s. I am 60 years old. And I think of them often as my mentees, and sometimes they are my mentors. I don't want to think that because I am a certain age, there is not something left for me to learn. And so they are often teaching me as I am teaching them. And so I look to them for inspiration. I look to them for understanding. Sometimes when I have been in a leadership position outside of the legislature, and I have had to work with a generation of 20-year-olds, it was sometimes difficult for me to understand their perspective. When you go to work, in my generation, when you go to work, you get to work on time, you are there to work. I'm not your friend. You don't necessarily get your birthday off. And so it was very interesting to learn about different perspectives, work and work-life balance. And so I have learned from people who are the generation below me, but I have also learned from the generations that came before me. I can often see women who were in my church, who were my Sunday school teachers, who were just, sometimes it was just that lady who would give you a peppermint from her purse. And so I think about Mrs. Johnson and Mrs. Carr and some of the phenomenal women at First ME Church who I may not have said anything to, and they may have only said a few words to me, but I've watched and I learned. So there are many things. There are people from the generation before and the generation that's right behind me that I have learned much from. And they are my inspiration.
Aisha, thoughts?
Sure.
Who's your inspiration?
I have been running this question through my head, and I have 100 people. So since we don't have time, I'll go with Coretta Scott King, and really a lot of women in the movement. There was a wonderful book, and I think it was maybe the Montgomery bus boycott, that talked about how they had to time it well, and all of these women really ran the movement. And at the time, they knew that they needed a male to be the face of the movement based on where we were in the country. And so you have all of these dynamite women that are simply the reason that we're here in the capacity that we're in, because they were the organizers, the planners, and the people to pull it together. And so I admire those women for leading us to where we are. And then I have to also say that those who are younger than I am, I really admire, although not in politics. I take Simone Biles to be amazing. I think in a time when I'm a zennial, and so, we have this kind of cross between sacrifice yourself and just get the work done, right? And then those who are brave enough to say, this is not okay, and I need to take care of myself. That takes a level of bravery that is really important for us to acknowledge and realize as we do this work and work so hard on behalf of other people, that we can also acknowledge ourselves.
That is great, and could not agree more. Coretta Scott King is an absolute inspiration. And I think for those of you, I will just also throw out a colleague of ours has just recently written a book called, I believe it's called Three Mothers. And it talks about the mother of Martin Luther King, I think Malcolm X, and Mr. Baldwin. Is that right? And talks about the impact that the moms have had in this movement. And so just really appreciate that insight, Aisha. We have a question in the chat, so I'm going to pivot a little bit with the few minutes that we have left. And Dawn Bennett, who for those of you in Washington know, just ran a recent campaign of her own, and is just an amazing leader here in the South Puget Sound area, shares this question for you all. How do you all deal with race and racism in your perspective positions? And her comment is, she can only imagine the patience that you all have to hold while you're doing this work. And so would love, as comfortable as you are, to share any thoughts or insights that you might have in answering that question. And I'll say this before you all answer. I find it a sad day in America when we have to ask the Black women what it's like to deal with racism. And I know every single one of you is processing some situation, some experience, if not one that you had this week, on how you all have had to deal with this as leaders in our community. So really appreciate the courage, Dawn, for asking that question. And Representative Entman, I'm not sure, did you hear the question? Okay, yeah, and I know you've had to deal with it. So why don't we go ahead and start with Aisha this time and then come back to Representative Entman and then to Lakeisha.
Well, I have to say that in some ways I'm in a unique place. One of the most I've been in, working mostly with Black women. So it changes the dynamic of the conversation and the space that I work in consistently. But I think that we're still just underestimated, right? How we show up and the work that we do. I will say, sometimes as an organization, we're not expected to provide as much for our candidates as others do. And so institutionally, structurally, and from a financial perspective, that can be true that some organizations that have been around 30, 40 years or the party have a different legal capability to be able to do things. But, I think that it just takes consistently showing up and showing your value and telling your story. And I think that Congresswoman Strickland is, absolutely right. It's very hard to deal with every single microaggression, or you'll waste your time and your energy. And the thing about that's really important about what she said, right, is that if you do that, you also lose focus and you don't get to make the optimum impact. So you don't want to chase every rabbit. And it is, though, important, I think, to address the larger things so that people know that you're present and paying attention, so that they also get a reflection back at themselves. I think in some of our spaces, people want to do this work and they want to be present and they want to make all these changes. So when the opportunity presents itself, it is good to address it where it's possible.
Thoughts, Representative Entman?
So, racism rears its ugly head in many different places and in many different forms. I have had numerous experiences just as a person in life and as a legislator. I think that what I am looking to do and what I hope to do is to question the foundational institutional racism. A person not liking me because I'm Black is one thing, but systems that are put in place that harm people who look like me is another thing. And I fight the structure. The individual racist, as I tell people, you can be racist all day long when you are at home, but when you come to this place, there are standards which you must abide by. And as a legislator, I think it is my job to set those standards and hold you accountable when you are not meeting those standards. And I try to do that in the legislation that I put forward. I can't right every wrong. I can acknowledge where the wrongs are and try very hard to change the structure. I have walked into an institution that was not made for me. It was not made for most people. We are a part-time legislature, and we all know it's a full-time job. It does not make any sense to say that we are a part-time legislature and we only work a 60-day session or a 105-day session. Every time I walk out of the door, I am Representative Deborah Entman, unless I am completely incognito, and I know how to do that. And so I can't get caught up in the quote unquote everyday racism because I would literally never get out of the bed. But I really try hard to look at the structural, foundational racism and make changes where I can. That is what gives me hope. And that is what is motivating me to continue to do this work.
Just before you jump in, Lakeisha, to catch you up, Senator Nobles, the question that Don Bennett asked was just for insights that you all have on how you all deal with race and racism in the respective jobs that you hold. And we kind of preface this answer at your comfort level, but wanted to give you a chance to be thinking about that while Lakeisha answers.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Like at first, I definitely was going through the Rolodex of experiences. And again, I appreciate everybody on this panel because I've seen all of you walk through it with grace. I've been in the room and actually watched it happen, be that from the people you're working with, the people in the community, or even like on some of your own committees and work. So it's definitely, I appreciate again the leadership on this panel and you guys kind of forging through. I think for myself, it's kind of what Representative Intiman said, staying focused on the work that I can actually do. That's super helpful because if I'm not like super focused on, you know, our scholars and like what this means for our kids, having this such diverse and robust district and like really seeing this as the diamond that it is, the multifaceted thing that it is, it's kind of easy to just get stuck. So I try and stay focused on my work, I do think there is some education, like I really draw people back to what I actually can do, like and what this is about, like centering it on that. And then I would just say, again, stepping away and having that self-care. Like it is so great that I have a community to step back into. I have people around me who will, you know, check in, be like, yep, that just happened and you're good, you know? And I love having those elders in my life who would just look at me and be like, oh, you just got there? Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that happened about 20, 30 years ago. Well, you're right on track. Keep going. So, you know, I think just remembering, you know, this is all a part of the work and you know, if you're not getting some kind of pushback, you're not doing it right. So I just kind of, I think, lean on that.
Thank you for sharing that, Lakeisha. And Senator, we'll round out that question with you. How are you handling it? How does it manifest for you?
Thank you. And it was great to listen to other responses. And I want to let folks know that I'm also the president and CEO of the Tacoma Urban League. So it is my job. I get paid to tackle issues of systemic racism. And so I feel like I had some experience before stepping into this arena, especially on a state level, because I am still an elected school board director. But that work has been fairly different than state level elected office. But I want to agree that I think staying focused is so important. I think I feel so bad for candidates or even elected officials who get distracted by tweets, distracted by comments, distracted by emails. I mean, thrown completely off track because of what other people are saying. And I think I wouldn't be here today if I was worried about what people said about me because I was a teen mom, because I was experiencing foster care, because we experienced homelessness as a kid. So I have so much practice staying focused and not worried about people saying what the statistics are implying about my success or how I should respond. And I think when tackling racism, I just utilize all of those skills and tactics to stay in my lane and to know my goals and to do the work that lies ahead and to do that in partnership with community. I also remember who's in power. It's one thing to be speaking. And I feel like a lot of times people who are being racist, they're speaking. I mean, they're talking, no doubt. But it's another thing to be in my position of power and to be listened to. So I'm listened to when I'm setting policy. I'm listened to when I'm sitting in meetings and able to say what I want to see and not see. And a lot of people are doing a lot of talking, a lot of speaking, but who is listening? A lot of them are just talking to themselves, to their echo chambers, to people who think like them. But many of us are in positions of power where the people who listen to us are helping us to change laws, to change the trajectory of this state, of our communities. And so I remember that power, and I always want to be listened to. I want people to hear me. I never want to be in a position of just speaking, just talking. That's great, but that's also a waste of my time. So I want to be in a place of folks who want to listen and who respect me and what I have to say. And I think there's a lot to be said about extending love and kindness. I identify as a woman of faith. And I think when it comes to people who are being nasty and racist, and even times when I feel like this is rubbing against me thinking I'm in a safe environment or a safe space and need to take measures to make sure I'm protecting myself and my family, I remember whose daughter I am. And I still remember that I want to show up in my community and in my world and in this country as a person who extends love and kindness and grace. And so I also don't want to let other people's nastiness and hatred and racism impact who I am and how I show up. And that takes daily work. Like, trust me, I sometimes have to hit delete on that comeback on social media of like, come on, God, come through right now. Come through for your girl. So it's not a natural, like I'm unbothered all the time, but it's a practice of being unbothered, and it takes daily work. But it's such a detriment when folks get caught up in that. So it's okay to be human and to have that reaction of like, okay, now I'm from the streets, but it's like, but guess what? I'm not in the streets now. I'm in a position of power, and I can do so much more than the yakking that you're doing. And I don't answer every question that's asked of me. People like to go hard and ask questions on social media. Why are you? Why aren't you? Why is this? I don't have to, just because somebody asked on me, I have to answer. Okay, thank you for the question. Goodbye. Okay, thank you for your hatred. Goodbye. Like, every time someone is reacting or responding or inviting you into a conversation doesn't mean you have to show up. You don't have to show up for every invitation. And I even tell people, like, don't share that with me. I don't care if there are things out in the universe and people are saying things. I don't need to respond to it. You just have to practice that self-control of not responding and reacting to everything that's out there. And I heard Representative Intiman just kind of speak about, like, you wouldn't get out of bed if you focused on all the things that people are doing. I see someone in the chat talking about boundaries. Like, absolutely. Like, at some point you have to tell yourself, what is it that you stand for? How is it that you think? What is it that you believe? What is it that you know about yourself? You ran that piece of legislation because you know what the needs are in community. And now you're distracted because people are saying, oh, you're giving people low income a free handout. Come on, you know the facts. Let them deal with their own fear and their own fictional narrative. You got the facts, the information. So stay focused on what you're doing. And those are just my principles. And again, it takes daily practice. So I don't want to make it seem like I have perfected this and it's just so easy. It's every day, and it's a good support system, and it's colleagues and family members and friends who think and feel the way I do. But at the end of the day, I can stand alone and know that I'm focused. I'm not going to answer everything that's asked of me. If I didn't send for you, don't come for me. Just because you invited me doesn't mean I'm gonna show up. I recognize how much power and control I have over myself, and I let people do whatever it is that they need to do. I just stay in control and focused on myself and the work that I'm committed to for my community.
Well, I know it's a Thursday night, but I feel like I got a little Sunday morning there. So thank you very much, Senator Nobles, for those comments. And I know that other folks in the chat are like, you are on fire right now. Deborah Entman is on fire. Lakeisha Phillips, Aisha Du, y'all are on fire tonight, inspiring a lot of folks on this call. So we just have 2 more questions for you, and then we'll let you get back to the important work that y'all are doing down in Olympia and on our school board and back in DC. So one of the questions that was asked in the chat by Kathy Mulcairn, who is also a current school board member, and I know that Director Mulcairn and I've also had this conversation, so I'll give a little plug at the end of your guys' remarks for one of the things that we are doing proactively. But her question is really, okay, great, we've broken the barrier. We've gotten more women, Black women in particular, elected. What do we do to support them now? What is it that you all would advise folks to do to help support you? You know, we spend billions of dollars recruiting women and people of color. Aisha can talk about this from her organizational perspective, training you up to run, teaching you how to campaign. We spend $0, then supporting you once you're actually in elected office. So would love to hear from you all. Like, what does that look like? How can people on this call help you survive institutions that were not built for you, by you, or with your inclusion in mind? And why don't we start with Aisha, since this is literally what she does for a living.
So we have a fellows program, and there are many elected women in our fellows program. So the program is developed for people who are willing and ready to go to the next level. And so one of the consistent things that we hear when we're in community with each other is that after doing all the advocacy work, after doing all these things and then getting elected, then people leave them, right? And so I think that it's really important for us to remember that we elected people for a reason, that we elected these really amazing, talented Black women who most likely have some type of track record in the community prior to getting elected. I think it's rare that we elect Black women who don't have a connection to the community at all, or they probably wouldn't be elected, right? So just remembering who they were and then also who they are. And I think it's just really important to realize, as someone said earlier, I think it was Representative Inneman, you're changing an entire system. One person is not going to be able to change an entire system overnight or within a year. And so just remembering that the work takes time. And just because you don't see the results of everything immediately, it doesn't mean that the work isn't happening in the course of public meetings and also in committee meetings and also, you know, in conversations where advocacy takes place from that perspective. And then I would say, you know, Black women raising money, it's always an issue. So continue to donate for the next election, you know, put it on a $5 a month for 12 months, whatever that looks like, so that when it's time for re-election, they don't have to start over. And I would also say that a lot of times the second election, the third election, the fourth election, people forget. And they think, oh, well, we did that work and we made it happen once. And so it's going to happen again. And there's no guarantee. So just continuing to really support from election to election. And then I would say it's really important to show up and continue to be an advocate on behalf of issues that are important to you. And I would say, you know, it's an inside-outside game, right? And that is working in tandem with the women that you elected, and also then continuing to be a voice so they're still not a lone voice and people know that they're representing a community and not just themselves.
Amazing. For the 3 elected women on this call, what can we be doing to support you? What do you all need?
Well, I'd like to say, and I'm not trying to be rude to Aisha, but in our community right now, we are electing Black women in some of our city councils that are not from our community. They are usually representing the Republican Party, and they aren't always moving in the same way that we are moving. Some of them will state that they do not believe that there is such a thing as systematic racism. And so we are wasting our time trying to change something that doesn't exist. So I want to make sure that we understand that, as the old folks would say, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. That's number one. Number two, yes, I will say that having small reoccurring donations that are consistent means that I always have some money in my campaign chest, because running every 2 years means you do need to raise money. It's very hard to start from zero. So I have people who send me $10 a month. They've been doing it for years. I have one person who sends me approximately $150 per month, and that person has been doing that for years. My core group of people, I have known some of them since I was in the 6th grade. Those are people who have consistently supported me, whether they live in the Pacific Northwest or not. That is something that has been very helpful for me. So extend your networks and think about who your networks are, and they may not be within your zip code, but that doesn't mean they don't support the work that you're doing. But more than anything else, I would say, trust us to understand where we are and what we're doing. And the fact that you supported a candidate doesn't mean you can dictate the candidate's work. You can make suggestions, you can give us your opinion, but you have to remember, we all have to remember, we get information from many different sources. And as a legislator, I try to make the best decisions based on my legislative knowledge and knowledge of the community. It is not that I am disrespecting you or forgetting where I came from. I have gained additional knowledge and I am using that to make moves that you might not always see or understand, but trust and believe that I am still working on behalf of community.
Look at Representative Intiman still giving the nuggets, man. I should be writing notes. Somebody take notes. I can get those later. No, I would agree. I think I really do appreciate kind of what Aisha said, people still checking in. I know I try and do that with some people here, like just check in and ask how we're doing. I think I saw it online, like some people are pulling almost a 20-hour day the other day. Like, I think a lot of times people don't understand. 22, I saw that, yeah.
It was 22. It was 22 hours. We started at 9:30 one day and ended at 6:30 the next day. It was 22 hours on the floor.
Right. See, I think a lot of times people don't necessarily understand or see that. So I love, again, what you said, like, know that we're doing the work, know that we're trying to piece it together, like we're trying to figure it out and work with what we have and still learn on the fly. Because I can speak for myself. I wasn't raised around politics. I didn't really know how any of these systems work. There wasn't like, and then you get all the information when you get there. There's tons more that you would just never know. And I'm like, oh, that's how that works. Oh, okay. There's spoken and unspoken rules. So I think just checking in is incredibly helpful. And I will say, I do love when people show up. Like, that's my favorite part. I can be at a school board meeting and see another mom walk in and kind of just say hello. And it's really cool to see your community there, because a lot of times people don't get to see you when you're doing those, tough decisions, asking those hard questions. So showing up and just ask. I think just ask. It can be anything from I need food because I've been working 22 hours straight to, you know what, just you checking in with me was super, super helpful. Or maybe just sitting in the room like, hey, come check out the next board meeting. I'd love your feedback. That's helpful too. Like, I'd love for you to give me some feedback on this, because it's a learning process. And again, it's nice to have people with you.
Yeah, and I would say definitely continue to be supportive through encouragement, through amplifying our messages on social media. Once someone is elected, they typically will have another page that is their elected page versus their campaign page or personal page, but resharing content, continuing to like show up to events, like just as much as you might show up to a campaign event to get one of your favorite candidates elected, showing up to events or meetings, and take advantage now while we still have so many virtual events and you can kind of listen in, but still show up in those events, continue the civic engagement, and highlighting, in our case, our legislation in the Senate or in the House. But I think just continuing to provide those words of encouragement. And, while I don't encourage anyone to do like I don't want to encourage anyone to do social media fighting, but I think I expect for those who are elected to, and also people who are running to stay away from that. But I'm like, if you have time and energy and that's your thing and you want to provide facts and not fight, but if you want to debate someone, I'm like, then protect your elected officials and candidates from that. And I'm like, you can show up in their comments and provide facts. But again, I personally just I just feel like for people who feel like, oh no, that's my jam, I love a clapback, then, you can be that voice if you see people being disruptive or being disrespectful on your elected official or candidate's page. And then also if it's toxic or going in the wrong direction, or if that's not you, then don't engage. Like, that's just not me. And I will talk to people in positive ways, but again, I'm not going to waste time doing those types of, negative things, maybe like once a year, but like outside of that, I gotta, protect my energy. But yeah, I just think, just stay involved, stay engaged, but there are just so many ways to support us in our elected positions. Like, follow our newsletters, like all of our social media pages, and retweet us. And, when we are doing calls to action and asking you to, sign in pro in our bills, like sign in pro in our bills, you don't even have to testify, but they're just, even on a school board, when we're having our equity conversations and doing the hard work, like being that lone voice or being that voice sometimes that's in the minority, like show up to those meetings and just come in a virtual audience or just be in the audience to support us, so we know that our supporters are there. But just sometimes the presence, even if you're not saying anything, and even if you don't have the funds to continue contributing financially, just your presence and you being there is also impactful. So I think that's a lot of options for folks who are, able-bodied and able to move around, folks who have, different ways that they can show up, but there are just so many ways. Write a letter and drop it in my PO box and be like, I'm thinking of you. If you want to support me right now, I'm trying to send love notes to hospitals and schools, thanking them for being essential workers. So you can go to my, website and see how you can get engaged with that. But I'm like, even fun stuff, if you're like, I want to just tell healthcare workers, thank you. Like, you can support me by helping with that little campaign that I'm running right now, but lots and lots of ways to still support us once we're elected.
All right, well, friends, I know that this dialogue could go on all night, but we have two folks on the call tonight who I know need to get back to the work that the people's work happening in Olympia. I know Miss Aisha, I'm not going to say it's your bedtime yet, but I know it is late where you are, so just thank you for being with us. Miss Lakeisha, thank you so much for your hard work. I know the community you are serving can be rough and tumble sometimes, but we are so grateful for all of the hard work you're doing on behalf of our children. And friends, my name is Christine Reeves, former state representative and CWD board member. I am so honored and humbled to have had the opportunity to host this chat with you all this evening. And the last plug that I'll just put in, if you are looking for ways to think about the long-term game to support more women and people of color in elected office once they're elected, it's more than just changing the faces. To Deborah Entman, Representative Entman's point, it's about changing the spaces. Would love for you to check out the Political Equity Project we launched last year, focused on supporting women and people of color in these institutions that were not built for them, by them, or with their inclusion in mind. And would encourage you to tap into some of the CWD events that are coming up here in the next month as we continue to do the work here at the Center for Women and Democracy as well. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. To our esteemed panelists, thanks for coming. Thanks for being candid and vulnerable and courageous. And thanks for your leadership here in Washington. We know we're a better state because of you. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great night.